quick round of introductions over here, starting with Ramin Sayar. Ramin used to be the CEO at SumoLogic, currently a partner at DFJ. Ramin, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
There's not much more to introduce. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Oh, there are some stories.
No, I left the operating role a couple of years ago. I had a pleasure of working with a cybersecurity company called SumoLogic for about 9 years. We were able to grow it from about 10 million revenue to north of 300, go public during the pandemic, which is a whole nother experience in itself, and then deal with the public markets for 3 years as a small cap stock. So it was not that enjoyable. But private equity came in, as they do in the lifespan of companies, and took Sumo out, and I took some time off, worked on my, as I call it, my flip-flop tan for about a year, and then jumped back in and joined venture capital, trying to help founders build and scale their companies.
Thank you. George, we introduced you, but we didn't get the lower level details. And I know that you spoke a lot about agents, but it would be interesting to just, get a comparison between your corporate life and your investing life.
Oh, okay. I was like, I'm pretty sure I covered a lot of ground this morning. Corporate life versus venture life is the question. Okay, yeah. So it turns out when you're in venture, you sleep a lot better. That is the thing, because when you're grinding through company building, you don't sleep as much. I am thoroughly enjoying this moment in venture, mainly because I'm investing into many of the things that I was involved in building for quite a while. So that comes a little bit more naturally when you can work on investing into things that you've historically either wanted to build, thought you should build, felt someone built better than you. And so, yeah, those are the things I've been predominantly focused on. And I would say, it's a different thing going on the venture side for sure for someone like myself. What I try to do is focus on first principle of just help the founder and help the team work through the invariable challenges that come through company building. And if you can help them through that, everything will be fine. And so I was actually having lunch with one of my friends from Sequoia, and he and I were just talking about like this old cycle in venture. There's 3 opportunities to get it right. One is on the investment. Sometimes you might get it right. Sometimes you might not. The second time is like once you're actually working with a portfolio company, you can just help fix the things that just didn't work out in the initial investment, or just help work through the just the challenges of company building. And the third time is just finding good exits and finding good opportunities for whether it be an IPO or whether it be being able to be acquired from a strategic standpoint. Those are all great things that an investor can do for their founders. So that's what I've been doing.
Awesome. George, you mentioned this several times before I go to Abhishek, that, you actually wrote up the whole thesis, a theme that, this is what is going to change in data engineering. And then you found the companies which were going to modernize in terms of spaces, whether it was MDM, catalog, observability, and then you just found, the best companies to invest in that. That's great. Abhishek, you've taken a new role last year, or 18 months now.
Yeah.
And you were part of HP Pathfinder before that. You were also part of Cisco. What has changed big time for you? And, just a sneak peek into what are you investing today?
Yeah, no, thank you.
World domination.
So just, a lot of change has happened, and a lot of building. I was fortunate to get into this role and building our own startup, which was Prosperity7, which is now a $5 billion fund backed by Saudi Aramco. But the idea was also to go out and invest in what would be relevant in the future. And, taking the page off George's book, we have built our platform to be much more thesis driven, much more looking at, being proactive rather than, hey, here's a new shining object called AI or whatever else, and then go after that. So, totally enjoyed, obviously, working with Rohit, George, and Ramin, but we see the world in a very similar way. The opportunity with us is we can then help super scale some of our portfolio companies, which we are in the process of doing. So,
Ramin, we kind of understand where George is investing right now. We heard from him about 45 minutes about all, his thoughts on agents and stuff. Initially, when I came into the room, I was thinking that maybe this opportunity is $100 billion. But then I saw one of the diagrams that he put together, which had agents at the center and then, workflows and then services and then society. How are you thinking about investments from DFJ at this point in time?
I guess we got to be careful because there's a lot of momentum investors and just kind of inertia towards initially that was the foundation models, right? And now we know where that's going to end up, right? It's going to be a combination of open source and however you internalize it. Now the value is going to very quickly shift to either the registries/gateways, the workflow engines that need to orchestrate agents, the identity for non-human identity in terms of access controls and policies, and then last but definitely not least, the governance layer that needs to manage all this. So we have a thesis around that area, which is what we're looking at. But then it's going to have a profound impact to how we do cyber. And a lot of it has been offensive technologies. And now with agents and AI, it can be a lot more defensive based. And so you can think of my old world of SOC or Security Operations Center, you can think of an AI SOC now that can remove, if not 20, 50% of the labor force that really needs to have that intuition and knowledge of understanding what's real and what's not, or have to go validate it through agents and AI. So you'll see profound impacts to how cyber is done from an offensive perspective, as well as a defense and bad actor perspective. So that's another category. I think last but definitely not least, the application of Gen AI to vertical in particular. Both the front office and back office aspects are going to get disrupted. So everything from sales and marketing, as well as back office to legal and finance, we have yet to see that. And then some vertical industries. We're already seeing legal be disrupted. We're seeing transportation and logistics be disrupted. And last but definitely not least, you'll see that probably, hopefully, in some of the other sectors like crypto and finance and the like, because we'll see how that plays out with the regulation.
What kind of risks exist? Do you think that, some of these capabilities which are appearing to be, outside the scope of the frontier model, are there possibilities that, the frontier models will become so smart that they will start getting included in the core capabilities? And therefore, there is a risk to some of these companies.
Yeah, there's always this fear that it's going to outsmart the human and the systems. But guess what? The humans evolve and the systems evolve, right? And, we haven't had a backlash event yet, knock on wood, in terms of one of these models doing something bad or unluckily opening something up. I think the moment that happens, and it's not a matter of if, but when, there'll be a lot more controls put in place. And I think there'll be a lot more lockdown in terms of these open frontier models that become more proprietary. And the thing to really remember here is the defensible position for these companies building around these models is not the parameters of the models. It's the workflows. It's the data that's been accessed. It's the logic, the business logic within the organization that's tied to these workflows that give you the context of how these systems need to interact. So I think while everyone's been focused on chasing these models, the real frontier is going to come from the applicability of those models in certain verticals in organizations that has a domain knowledge of the power user or the workforce that provides that context. And I think that's where we'll see really the Gen AI take off versus where we are now.
Can I add to that? Well, some of that is already becoming more and more evident. If you look at the last 6-8 months of just using the principle which Ramin outlined and applying it to coding, you saw the companies like Cursor and Windsurf and everybody else come in out of nowhere. I remember the word wrapper being a pretty dirty word in venture capital about 6 or 8 months ago. Guess what? That is changing, because what matters the most is, do you have custodian users? Are people willing to swipe the credit card and use your thing because they feel there is value to be given to them through the platform? And that's what we saw Cursor. And there have been many companies who have gone after building businesses in limited time. Nobody has seen companies like Cursor or, for that matter, Windsurf and others come out from the tangent. And if you really dissect the whole thing, it's an amazing user interface. Why should user interface be worth that much and should grow that fast? And I think that is where we are now learning, because the value is at the end of the day, with the users. A lot of the agents, a lot of the companies which are building enterprise agents who are going after enterprise are right now in that conundrum. Do I go towards, hey, I see the shining objects around directly talking to the users, or do I use a playbook of going after the enterprise, which is 4, 5, 6 months, we'll do this properly, and eventually we'll be winners. To be honest, that playbook is still not very evident and is not entirely written yet for the first time.
It's still very early. George, I want to go back to your comment from the earlier session and relating to what Abhishek is saying. You said, prosumer businesses are still, different than traditional enterprise businesses that you typically invest in. But there is another thing that, you and I exchanged one text when DeepSeek came out. And, you sent me a text saying frontier models don't have an advantage yet. Can you tie those things together? Because, can you play out how the frontier models will evolve, and is it headed towards search? Are these the new search platforms? And then how is what is an ideal enterprise playbook, according to you?
So when we think about the frontier models, each one is taking on a different incarnation of themselves, right? And it's very clear that at least OpenAI is going down the consumer path for sure. And it just so happens that it's big enough that anything that they do in the enterprise has to matter because they're so scaled out, almost similar to what like Google was in the enterprise even 15 years ago. It's like, did it really matter to Google's business? Not really, but did everyone have to pay attention? Kind of. So we're seeing that for sure among the larger frontier models because they're striking out on their own as consumer products, consumer brands, particularly OpenAI is right now. And the next wave of models are going about it differently for different reasons. Like it's very clear that Meta's offering an open source alternative and will always be a few steps behind wherever the frontier model is, but will catch up in whatever the release is that they have that's usable enough for most purposes, including enterprise consumption. And so we're in a moment where when we focus on the enterprise, I think Ramin and Abhishek pointed to this, there are incredible choices, right? Particularly when it comes to the use of foundation models. But I also want to highlight what are we using these foundation models for? And what's the best and most appropriate purpose for them inside of an enterprise application? And my view now is pretty simple. My view now is like the foundation models are best suited for probabilistic reasoning that will look like what a human can do and potentially what a human can never do. But it's going to be on the reasoning frontier that's going to be most valuable, particularly when it comes to enterprise use cases. And so when these enterprise systems are coming together, and this is what I talked about in the keynote, and I think the guys actually both alluded to this, but just didn't say the word out loud. It's the compound AI system that matters. And the use of the foundation model is for probabilistic reasoning purposes, but then there's going to be other things that are more deterministic, like your calculation engines, your aggregation engines, your existing systems, your existing machine learning, your existing data pipelines are going to be very much important for those compound AI systems to merge, particularly in the enterprise. So I don't view this as a foundation models are going to basically take over everything in the enterprise. It's just unlikely. And frankly, if they do, what they're taking over is not a valuable company or even perhaps a product, but a feature. So like someone pulled me aside and it's like, hey, by the way, there's like 30 folks that are doing text to SQL right now. And isn't the foundation model going to just like take that over? I was like, yeah, probably. But that's like a feature. And frankly, you shouldn't be building 30 companies on a feature. And so, yeah, that's going to be tough for if that's the only thing a entrepreneur is now doing in the market is providing a text to SQL service. So we are going to be able to build very profoundly large companies in the enterprise in the midst of the foundation models becoming as big and as important as they are. But the reality is it's going to feel like what databases were 20 years ago, right? Yes, the database market was important. The database market expanded into the apps market, but guess what? There was way, way more apps than there was apps provided by the database companies.
Yeah.
Ergo, read the logic in the room for what's going to happen with foundation models.
Yeah, this is something that, was best put by, I think, Chetan from Benchmark. He said, everybody always underestimated where the software market was going to be. And I feel that, we are also at, the bottom of where the estimation is for AI as well. One question, Ramin, as you are investing today in founders, you mentioned, security. I know that you have worked in security in the past, but minus the frontier models where so much investment has gone in, where do you anticipate, the next big chunk of money going in what kind of workflows and what kind of, scenarios, if you were to make a guess?
Well, I don't know about the next big chunk. I mean, I think you're seeing it spread out across a lot of areas. I led investment recently in an AI native software bill of materials type of technology because like everyone's chasing these agents that code. And the volume of code that's already being generated today without agents, 80% of that is based on open source libraries, right? So if you think about this fast forward, these agents that go out there and start to assemble code from open source libraries, they're going to be taking stuff that you don't know who built. And it's going to have even more risk. And so your software supply chain gets more risky. And so I invest in this company called Endor Labs because essentially they built an agent that watches the back of the agent developer.
Someone really likes Star Wars in that company.
They do.
Yeah.
Endor. Yes. And, the thesis here is pretty simple that, as code volumes increase, the velocity causes, guess what, more errors. Right? Mm-hmm. We've seen that with humans, and we're going to see that even more in machines. So I think the whole SDLC is my bigger point here, is going to get dramatically changed. If you think about the control point today in the software development lifecycle, guess what? It's the repository. It's where your code repository or GitHub is, right? And then it's your binary and your artifact repos downstream. And then it's when you deploy your code in production in a container or on Kubernetes, right? There's these different parts of the SDLC that are control points, and that is fundamentally going to change in terms of how code is deployed, but more importantly, the semantics in that workflow process. So you're going to see different sort of governance tool that has to sit on top that replaces what humans used to do manually.
Are you worried about a scenario where, the models and everything else in AI becomes so smart that, we lose control over the programming language itself? Because this is a question that I asked the Anthropic guys. I was there at an event and I was asking them, what if the language itself starts improving? Is there like a plug out scenario over here where we have to, switch off something?
I personally was not as worried about that. I don't.
Reference was to Star Wars, so you've got to imagine that.
I think we're a little ways from that, and I think it comes back to a point I made earlier. There's a long leash today with respect to AI and coding agents in a lot of organizations, and until we see the manifestation of code in production, not just on someone's desktop or in their own private repo, and you see kind of the manifestation of security issues or quality issues or reliability issues, there's not going to be enough systems or controls around it yet that will potentially prevent some of this, and it'll be a little bit of a backlash.
Just to add a few things, I come from a different vantage point a little bit because we also invest in hardware. And what we are seeing right now, yes, there's a lot of chat about agents and the things on top of foundation model. At the same time, the entire next generation data center is being, is coming in front of our eyes from, what the storage systems would be, what the networking would be, what the chips would be, how will the applications run, how will the data centers talk to each other. And that is also now evolving while keeping in mind what the data would be. Uh-huh. So as you think about the data centers, or as Jensen likes to talk them AI factories and other things, these AI factories of the future need to have the whole aspect around data sovereignty in mind. This was never the case. It was a centralized data center in the middle of the country. All the applications ran, nobody cared about. So you can add a bunch of compliance and data governance, but now if the model is being trained in a particular country, that data cannot leave that country. the inference on runtime needs to happen in that country. So the whole AI and data sovereignty are intertwined, along with the data center itself being changed dramatically. So there is like three vectors which we see, and especially for us, some of our LPs they just announced some of the largest data center deployments on the planet last week, and data sovereignty is becoming a big deal.
I have a question for you.
One comment on that previous question as well, in terms of language, right? Just a quick comment there. I think if we think about language just like we think about humans and our own languages, if the use of that language is about getting something probabilistically reasoned as a human, do we really care what the efficiency of that language is? And do we really care what language it is in? Probably not. Like, it's just like, as long as we can get to the reasoning outcome, right? But the flip side of it is, if that is the same way that we would approach something that we would want more deterministic, like, I don't know, a calculation, right? No, actually, you want precision there. You want efficiency. You want traceability, and you do care what the language is in. So I think it's a question of what we're making these things go do, right? If we're making the things that we're talking about do deterministic activities, then the precision of what it does and how it does it and what language is encoded in it all matters, right? But if it is part of a, human or near human-like probabilistic experience, I don't think we care. Like, it's just like anyone else doing work. We just want to know that it can, diligently think through stuff, but not necessarily how it did it. We don't care.
So I agree with you. The only thing that I was commenting on is that, compilers will get better because, AI will make compilers better. And, we went from assembly to, structured programming to object-oriented to, closures now. But I think that there is a use case over here where
you can go the other way. And this is Abhishek was heading to this as well, right? It's not just the compilers themselves at lower level getting better. It's assembly getting better.
Exactly.
Right? It's chip design getting better. It's the fabs themselves it's for sure. I just came across a company that is just about to help optimize electricity at a data center to when these like rolling brownouts and stuff occur in certain, sort of locations, particularly in California. How do you make sure that the data center workloads are efficiently tuning down for the moment that you need more capacity elsewhere? Like, everything can get better, including all the way down to the electricity.
So what's interesting about that comment is, like, software is the GPU hardware innovation is causing the whole software stack to be dramatically
100%,
changed, right?
Including, cables, networking, everything.
Yeah. So you think about Ethernet and the way the switching is happening within a data center, across data center, and now moving to optical. You think about the heat that's generating the data center and the form factors of these new compute, stacks, having a GPU, CPU chip next to each other for dual processing, right?
Going from air cooled to liquid cooled now.
And that's going to liquid cool or gel cooled type of, capabilities. And what's common across that is the shortage of power, right? Solar can't produce enough. Wind can't produce enough. So nuclear has to be another outlet, mechanism that we look at, whether it's fusion or fission, proximity to data centers, because you're going to have these brownouts, blackouts that can't power the way we live. The amount of consumption of electricity we drive or strive for every day, many of us probably have electric cars, right? Charging, let alone everything else. So it's changing everything in terms of how we live.
And we are right at the, probably I'll say level 0 right now. Reasoning models are 6 months, 8 months old. Imagine when reasoning models are reasoning with other reasoning models, what happens to the amount of compute needed and translated to amount of energy needed. So very quickly, all of this is going to come down to not a compute arbitrage, which it is right now, and NVIDIA is king, and so are a lot of other companies. But eventually, it's going to shift into what Ramin said. It's going to be an energy arbitrage. And the companies who do or the countries which do this energy arbitrage better, eventually will have an opportunity to go do AI better.
Feels like you know some people.
I was thinking the same thing.
No humility on that. You could only take 10% of Google's search traffic today, send it to a model and see what happens. We all saw what image generation did to the GPUs.
But really, let's pull on the question you asked for a second, because this hits personally for me at home. I have a kid in college who's studying business and computer science, and he's wondering if he comes out, if he's gonna have a job, right? It's like, will I have a job? It's like, yeah, you're gonna have a job because you're studying CS and AI, and all you have to know is Python, and you'll be fine. This was a joke just to ease the kind of uncertainty, but it's fundamentally going to change the way that software engineering is taught, right? You got to question even whether universities are the right mechanism for everyone.
Well, Python may not be the programming language by the time he comes out of college.
It may not, but my point is, like, every time there's been these big shifts, we've had to readapt, we've had to relearn. And so we will relearn, what kind of language it is. We will readapt and relearn to what suits, kind of the new operating model. And the new operating model is going to be fundamentally different for how you think about building software. You start top down now. You don't start bottom up from the architecture. You start with requirements and system architecture, know-how, right? As much as we like to say product engineers and product managers, being one of them, used to think that way, no. It was like, what can I build and how fast can I get it out to sell it to a customer, right?
That is exactly, just yesterday I was having a conversation with another VC, and what he said was actually very intriguing, which is, I don't want to learn the software anymore. I want the software to tell me what it is and how it needs to be used. Think about this for a second. As a product manager, which I was one in my previous life, there was a lot about GUI and this is how it should be and blah, 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 how the workflow should be. If you're now thinking about designing a new product as a product manager with enough AI built in, the user interface changes on the fly based on what you want. You just saw that in Acceldata's demo today. That changes the consumer of that product itself. What does that do to the margins of those software businesses? That's another question.
Yeah, the workflows are no longer fixed. The workflows are changing. It's open workflows. Looks like, all of us are leaning into AI. I'm going to ask another question, one after the other. What's like a contrarian view?
Well, outside of AI, the firm, looks for, investments in new technologies like space. We invested in, SpaceX many years ago, and the limitation for a lot of previous investments in companies has been around either the capacity or size of the rocket, refueling, or whether you could, get past the atmosphere and then refuel somewhere else. And I think the interesting thing is this has nothing to do with AI, right? This has everything to do with possibly new life forms and new ways of travel. And so this is a whole new endeavor for us in terms of thinking about the art of possibility outside of what we narrowly focus on and the hype of AI. And so I think that has a profound impact to travel, but also, guess what? Defense. Mm-hmm. The defense zone is moving from the oceans and the borders to the sky. And it's not just about cyber and data, it's about how you protect your sky zones. And whoever can put satellites up there are interesting technologies where these satellites, these rockets can launch, big balloons get inflated, and they can start to rotate and have, defense mechanisms to shoot down things. And so, yes, it's Iran, it's China, it's Russia, it's whoever else you have to worry about. And so suddenly the applicability of some of the technologies now in AI and form factors and reasoning could be used even in space once we're able to get rockets and refueling and other things taken care of. So that's contrarian view in the sense, but it's also additive.
Indeed. George?
I think we alluded to one contrarian view, or may have skirted around it, but we actually might not have enough power, at least on a clean basis, to go build the scale of systems that we're talking about, particularly the ones that I showed on the chart earlier this morning. So if that is indeed the case, the contrarian view is the necessity of invention is going to be more compact models that, Jensen, close your ears, but might not need as many GPUs.
Right.
That are certainly from an inference standpoint, less necessary. And we might be at the end of all the training we ever need, at least for large scale pre-training training runs to happen, because we're just not going to have enough high quality data or enough power to presume that the next order of magnitude, and certainly in 100 or 1,000 orders of magnitude, are even reasonable or possible. So that's a weirdly contrarian move.
So the release cycle goes down to once a year or something for frontier models. Abhishek.
While we are playing the buzzword bingo, I'll add another buzzword these days about quantum computing.
Oh, yeah. I stayed away from that one.
Sure.
Quantum and AI. Okay.
Yeah.
It makes my head explode. But there is some very interesting things happening. If you look at really limited amount of quantum compute, which is available, 8 qubits or usable qubits or whatever it is, and apply it to help you look at the weights and biases inside a particular model. Again, AI or these fancy frontier models, at the end of the day, you're trying to solve the NP-hard problem. So if the two can work together, and there are a few companies which we have looked at, it helps on multiple fronts. One, you don't need troves and troves and troves of data to get your model to the levels which you want. And then on the inference side, how do you make it super efficient? So we are seeing, for the first time, I thought these two streams are going to be entirely different. We talked about how hybrid compute 4 or 5 years ago during my time at Hewlett-Packard, but now we're seeing these things coming together and helping one to the other. We'll see how the world evolves.
So my question is, how important is explainability for the enterprise adoption of AI? And given the non-deterministic nature of Gen AI, when compliance wants something very deterministic, are there any creative or innovative startups or ideas that you're seeing, or is that an area that really needs to be invented?
Hugely important. And frankly, it's happening as we speak, right? Because if we think about the compound AI systems that I'm referring to, inherently, there's got to be some lineage, traceability. The observability alone starts to drive a lot of the explainability. In fact, one of the partners for Acceldata is Fiddler. They're upstairs. I actually also invested in Fiddler. A lot of their time is spent on guardrails, explainability, particularly when it comes to models that are in production. That's one piece of the puzzle in terms of just making that explainability real and practical for enterprises. The other, which is like a really crazy topic, is something that's alluded to by Abhishek, which is the software should be able to explain itself. Well, guess what? So is that the case with the models. So if you look at like the deepest, hardest research in the model world right now, it's mechanistic interpretability. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at mechanistic interpretability, it's about not only can a model produce a result, but how does it reliably, consistently reproduce that result, and can it mechanistically tell you how it's done it? And so both in the internalization of the model itself, the manifestation of how compound AI systems are being built, as well as just the observability surrounding it, in all of these layers, explainability is going to be and is already quite an important topic of work.
These gentlemen will be available. Please feel free to hang out with them. Thank you.